Hey, what is going on, guys? It is Evan from Coaster Evolution. I hope you're having a wonderful day because today we are looking at all of the current operating roller coasters at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I visited here for the first time in summer of 2022, and despite this park only having 9 roller coasters, they have some really awesome rides here, so I'm super excited. Let's jump right on in. Tempesto was a great ride. It was my first Skyrocket 2 model, so I didn't really have too much expectations, but it had awesome forces. That roll at the top used to be the world's tallest inversion, so it's really cool. It's got good elements. It's very short, but this is a great coaster that fits in a small plot of land that pretty much any park can afford, and it's very thrilling, so definitely give this one an 8 out of 10. I'm sure that these lose their luster as you ride them more, but I only got one ride on this thing because the line was pretty long, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had a friend that worked as an intern at Premiere, and he said, you have to ride the Skyrocket 2 models in the back row. So I took his advice, and it was totally awesome. There's some crazy ejector air time, awesome forces, good hang time. It's a short ride, but really solid ride overall. Up next, we have Loch Ness Monster, and I expected this one to be super janky, super rough, but it ended up being really good overall, and I'm going to honestly put it in the low tier of great, because this reminded me thoroughly of Vortex at Kings Island, which I miss that coaster so much, except it wasn't as rough as Vortex was. And the interlocking loops is just the coolest thing. And I believe this roller coaster is like the only one left in the world with interlocking loops, since a lot of the shuttle loops that used to go back and forth and have interlocking loops have been removed. So that's another really cool thing about Loch Ness Monster. It does definitely meander around through the tunnels a little bit, but because it's so dark, you just can't see anything of where you're going, so I was just anticipating getting thrown around in the tunnel, but it was pretty smooth overall. This was a really fun coaster. It almost always has no line at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It probably is still the roughest coaster at this park, but it's a really fun one in my opinion. I hope they keep this around for many, many years to come. Up next, I'm going to do InvadR. And InvadR was honestly a little bit disappointing in my opinion. It seemed really short for a GCI. It is a bit smaller than most of their normal coasters. But we waited for this for like an hour and a half to get this credit, and for whatever reason, the ride-ops were being really slow and the line was just taking forever. So it might have left a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth, getting off the ride and it not being that special. We were near the back, so we were in a pretty optimal spot on the train, but unfortunately this one just didn't deliver as much as the other ones I had been on, like Mystic Timbers and Prowler. The layout is pretty short, the airtime isn't very strong compared to other GCIs, and for that reason I'm just going to consider it a good ride. It's still nowhere near a bad coaster, but it's just not my favorite. Up next, Griffin. Griffin is a great coaster. Put it right up there ahead of Tempesto. It is really similar to all of the other dive coasters, but because it doesn't have the vest restraints and still has a pretty decent drop in layout, you can get some really good airtime, so that's why it's my favorite of all the dive coasters I've been on so far. Up next, we have Apollo's Chariot. This was the first B&M Hyper, which is why it's considered one of the worst. I don't think it was that bad. We specifically waited for the back row because we knew it was going to be better. The airtime was going to be stronger in the back. So if you're riding anywhere else on the train, it's probably going to be somewhere down here in good maybe, or below some of these other rides. But because I rode it in the back, the airtime was actually pretty decent. I love the setting out there in the woods and going over the river and everything. So I'm going to put this in great, just above Griffin. It is a long ride. It's very enjoyable. The airtime is decent. The airtime isn't as good as some of the others, but it's still a great ride. One of my favorites at this park, and I love it overall. Up next, we have Verbolten. Verbolten gets the prize for the biggest surprise at this park. I'm going to put it way up here, probably just behind Apollo's Chariot. But this is probably one of the best, like, family thrill coasters ever. It has a great layout. It's partially indoors, partially outdoors. It has really cool elements. It has a drop track, which a lot of people that I was riding with weren't aware of, so that was really cool seeing everybody's reaction. It's just a really solid coaster. It has great theming. It's very smooth. It's just a really great ride, a very fitting predecessor to Big Bad Wolf, and one of the best coasters here at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. Then we also have Alpengeist. It's getting really busy up here in the great category because Alpengeist is a great roller coaster as well, and I would give it an 8 out of 10. It wasn't as spectacular as I was hoping, unfortunately. I think I set my expectations a little bit too high for Alpengeist just because it's so big. It didn't seem to have a drop that was as good as like Banshee, per se, but it's still a really good ride and has some of the strongest positive Gs I think I've ever felt on a coaster before. It's insane. Like my butt hurt after being on this ride because of how much force you're being just shoved into your seat, especially on the inversions and after that first drop. It was really cool, and I probably don't appreciate positive Gs as much as the average coaster enthusiast, but if you love positive Gs, Alpengeist is your ride. The other reason I think it's not quite the upper tier of B&M inverts is because the pacing does kind of die out towards the end. It does kind of meander around a little bit, and they probably could have done a little bit better with the theming. They have like some little like ice zones towards the end of the ride, but they definitely could have done a little bit more with the theming. But overall, it's a great ride. You can't complain too much about it. It's a B&M invert, and it's a monster huge one at that, so it is a great ride overall. And finally, we have Pantheon. Pantheon being the new Intamin shuttle launch coaster that was supposed to open up in 2020. Of course, SeaWorld delayed it, so it opened up in 2022 this past year, and I got a ride on it, and this coaster is ultra elite. It's incredible. It's so smooth. Like those new Intamin trains and the new restraints like found on like Velocicoaster and Pantheon literally feel like you're floating on a cloud. It's so smooth. I love the shuttle launch. You get some incredible airtime on that. You get some hang time on that corkscrew barrel roll before the launch. The spike and the shuttle launch part is probably my favorite portion of the ride because you just get so much airtime, and the airtime going backwards is so strong after you're going up, right before you go up the spike. And the airtime on the spike is so good too. You get like multiple, probably like at least 5 seconds of floater airtime. You definitely want to ride this coaster near the back for that reason, just so you can be higher up on the spike and get as much airtime as possible on that. And then the top hat could honestly be taken a little bit faster, but after the top hat, the elements are really great. You get some decent floater airtime on that outer bank. The zero-G stall is pretty good, so there's not much to complain about for this ride other than the theming. Like, the theming is really cool and how it fits in with, like, the Greek area of the park, but they did little to nothing in terms of theming in the station or when you're on the ride at all, which is a really big bummer. But I don't rate coasters based on their theming, largely. What matters the most to me is the ride experience and the forces that you experience on a ride. So overall, Pantheon is an ultra elite coaster. I would probably give it a 9.5 out of 10. It would be more perfect if it had better theming and if it took the pacing just a little bit faster over the top hat and through the second half of the layout. But overall, it does feel like a really solid full circuit coaster. I do think this works as a really good standout at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I think they're going to get another standout when it comes to their next project, which is supposed to be that 220-foot, supposedly a hyper coaster of some sort. Maybe it's an RMC Hyper Hybrid. Maybe it's some sort of like mock hyper, which would be incredible too. So we'll have to wait and see on that. I actually have a video that I put out on what I think will be this 220-foot hyper roller coaster supposedly coming to Busch Gardens Williamsburg. So check that out in the card above up here if you haven't seen that video yet. But also, one other coaster I didn't talk about, it's not listed here because it's not open yet, is Dark Coaster. Project Dark Coaster, opening up in 2023. That is a family launch coaster. It's made by Intamin. It's going to be in the old Curse of Dark Coaster castle. That one, it looks pretty tame. It'll be interesting to see how they theme it. If the theming is well done, I would put it in the good category, especially in terms of a family coaster. It's probably going to be a good one. In terms of what Busch Gardens Williamsburg could use, they just need more roller coasters. I know they prioritize like quality over quantity, and obviously they're doing a good job of that because every coaster they have here is above okay, which is just incredible and phenomenal. A ton of great rides here. I wish I could have spread them out a little bit more, but honestly, all of these are just great, and Pantheon is ultra elite. It's currently my number 4 overall, which is really cool. You definitely got to come out and visit Busch Gardens Williamsburg. There's a ton of other stuff to do around the area, especially if you love history. Go and visit Colonial Williamsburg and stuff. There's a lot of other parks nearby. Of course, King's Dominion is only an hour away. So if you're coming out here, make sure to stop at King's Dominion, and there's a couple other parks that are nearby. I'll put on screen and show a map. But all in all, a great park with great roller coasters. I'm so excited to see what they add here in the future. That's all for this video. Make sure to like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more coaster content at least twice a week, more tier lists and new series coming out all the time. I'm constantly in the works of doing new stuff and creating new content, so make sure to stay tuned for that. I hope each and every one of you have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you next time.